I've experienced telepathy more than once, but for a long time, I brushed it off. Like most of us, I grew up inside the rigid cages of modern science. Science tells us that what can be measured is what's real, and I respect that. As an engineer, I live by data and evidence, but I'm also aware of the fact that there are just some things we don't have the technology or the openness to measure yet. I mean, Sir Isaac Newton formulated the law of universal gravitation in 1687, but gravity still existed before then. Not having proved something just yet doesn't make it unreal. And while science is catching up, and we'll cover some of that research in this episode, there are just some experiences that refuse to stay small. So let's discuss them. After all, science works best when we stay curious. We test things, we question them, we update our ideas when new evidence appears. That's the true spirit of science, investigation, not dogma. When it comes to my personal experience with telepathy, I've had moments with lovers where words became unnecessary. We were just so in sync, it was like our minds were hanging out in the same space. While our bodies were separated, looking at each other's eyes, there was just no need for words to understand what the other was thinking. Has that ever happened to you? I've also sent thoughts from across the world, quiet, intentional messages, and had them mirrored back to me without the other person ever knowing what I was doing. I felt the same connection with close friends, sometimes completely sober, and sometimes during altered states brought on by psychedelics. I've even experienced telepathy with plants. Yeah, we are going there. The more I learn through science, psychology, and spiritual research, the more I believe that telepathy isn't a supernatural gift reserved for the few. It's a forgotten language, one that our ancestors were fluent in, and one that humanity is now beginning to remember. So grab a tea and settle in. This episode is going to be a fun one. Let's talk telepathy. When we talk about telepathy, it's easy to imagine something mystical or supernatural. But some of the most fascinating research today is showing us that telepathy might actually be scientifically natural, just not yet scientifically understood. Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell, a Johns Hopkins trained neuroscientist and former Harvard Medical School faculty, has spent years studying nonverbal acoustic savants who seem to demonstrate real, verifiable telepathic ability. These children, many of whom cannot speak, have repeatedly shown they can read numbers, words, or sentences that someone else is merely thinking, sometimes with 100% accuracy, even when tested in a Faraday cage. That's an enclosure that blocks electromagnetic signals. If that sounds impossible, it's because we've been taught to believe that the mind lives inside the brain. But Dr. Powell's findings challenge that. She suggests that the brain isn't a generator of consciousness. It's a receiver. Just like a radio tunes into signals that already exist, our brain tunes into consciousness, a field that connects every living being. There's an incredibly interesting podcast series about this that's making international waves. It's called the Telepathy Tapes, and I highly recommend you listen to it. It's made by filmmaker Kai Dickens, and it features Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell, the neuroscientist who I just referenced. The Telepathy Tapes expanded this research by capturing telepathic abilities not only in laboratories, but in everyday life. Some of the experiments she filmed even demonstrated telepathic communication over Zoom, proving it's not just about proximity. From their work, 2 types of telepathy have emerged. Close proximity telepathy, when 2 people are physically near each other and their energy fields overlap, creating an instantaneous understanding, or non-local telepathy, when distance doesn't matter. It often occurs in moments of strong emotion, like when you just know something happened to someone you love before any call or message arrives. And the data is consistent, replicable, and statistically significant. As Kai Dickens says, it's actually more scientific to follow the data than ignore it. And finally, the scientific community is getting involved. In addition to Dr. Powell's work shown in the telepathy tapes, there are two major bodies of scientific data you can explore if you're curious about science and all the studies done till date. The first is the CIA's Stargate program, run through Stanford Research Institute, a 20-year-old remote viewing project with results that consistently scored above chance. And it has a 2023 peer-reviewed follow-up study in the journal Brain and Behavior. The second one I can recommend is the Ganzfeld telepathy experiments replicated across universities for decades, showing statistically significant mind-to-mind communication beyond what randomness can explain. So if you're curious, feel free to Google these. The information is out there. All right, now let's proceed with the theory proposed by Kai Dickens' expose. So if telepathy isn't carried by electromagnetic waves, where does it happen? Think of consciousness as the cloud, an invisible field that holds all information. Our brains are the devices that log in. When two consciousnesses tune to the same frequency, information passes instantly, beyond space and time. Mystics and indigenous healers have always described the same phenomenon. They call it the Akashic field, the Great Spirit, or simply the web of life. Others call it the collective consciousness, and I have an episode explaining that as well. Altered states like meditation, breathwork, or psychedelics make this field more accessible because they quiet the brain's verbal centers. They dissolve the boundaries created by language. And when language dissolves, awareness expands. I experienced it firsthand. Once, under the influence of psychedelics, I was outside in nature admiring a beautiful plant. Absent-mindedly, I started tugging on one of its leaves, and it didn't come off. I pulled again gently, but it was like the plant was holding onto the leaf. Then, I suddenly heard it. Not out loud, but unmistakably in my mind. The plant said to me, "You can't just pull off one of my leaves for your own amusement." And in that instant, I got like a rush of understanding. I saw not with my eyes, but with my awareness how the leaf was connected to the plant, and the plant to the soil, and the soil to the earth, and the earth to the universe. It wasn't just a leaf anymore. It was a living extension of a whole body of life. I realized I'd been treating it like a toy, like something separate from me, and something that was not alive. How selfish of me. After all, I had no intention of using the leaf for something purposeful. I simply wanted to tug it off its plant, play with it, and discard it. I let go of the leaf, and that experience never left me. Of course, when I went and told my friends, they laughed at me and discarded my story like I was some type of madwoman. But that communication never left me. Now I always respect plants, and I would never just pull off a flower or a leaf, at least without having a very purposeful use for it and without understanding that I'm taking a life, I am contributing. It gave me an understanding for all the living and breathing life all around me. And it taught me that telepathy isn't limited to human minds. It's life speaking to life. This universal field of communication isn't new. It's ancient. The Aboriginal people, the Indigenous people of Australia, shared this with the modern world through Dr. Gary Holz, an award-winning physicist and multiple patent holder. Dr. Holz was diagnosed with progressive multiple sclerosis and became a quadriplegic. In 1994, doctors gave him less than 2 years to live. A series of synchronicities led him deep into the Australian outback, where he lived with a remote Aboriginal tribe known for their 60,000-year-old healing practices. All of this is documented in the book Secrets of Aboriginal Healing. So, Dr. Holz arrived numb from the neck down, and he returned to America 2 weeks later transformed. The tribe not only healed him, but taught him that thought itself is energy. They communicated telepathically, sending restorative energy through a higher consciousness that they called the Big Guy. Holz regained sensation through his body and dedicated the rest of his life to merging quantum physics and Aboriginal healing. His story, told in the Secrets of Aboriginal Healing, offers something powerful, an independent cross-cultural validation that telepathy and healing through consciousness are real phenomena, accessible to those who live in harmony with nature. So, while working as a project manager in Dubai, I read The Culture Map by Erin Meyer, which changed how I understood communication. She explains that cultures exist on a spectrum, from low context to high context. Low context cultures like the US or UAE are relatively young, so people rely heavily on explicit communication. I mean, think about how young the USA and the UAE are in comparison to other countries in the world. So high context cultures like India, China, or Japan are ancient. Centuries of shared history mean people need fewer words. So much is simply understood. Now here's my interpretation. That shared understanding isn't just cultural, it's energetic. I believe high context communication is an early form of telepathy. When people share enough emotional and spiritual resonance, meaning flows naturally and wordlessly. This aligns perfectly with Dr. Powell's research. The more our brains rely on language, the less we rely on direct energetic exchange. So perhaps telepathy isn't something mystical to learn, but something ancient to remember. Of course, mention telepathy in a scientific circle and you'll likely get eye rolls. As an engineer, I understand why. The scientific method demands measurable proof. But I've also seen how often the scientific community refuses to explore what challenges its model. Telepathy doesn't lack data. It threatens the idea that consciousness is confined to the brain. But the true spirit of science isn't to protect what we know, it's to investigate what we don't. So maybe the question isn't, is telepathy real? Maybe it's, why are we so afraid to study what's right in front of us? Because right now, we do have some data. We do have some replication, and most importantly, we have our experience. So whether it's between lovers, friends, parents, and children, or even between you and a leaf, telepathy is real. It's not a superpower. It's our natural state of interconnectedness. It's the silent language of the soul. As our world becomes louder and more digital, maybe our next great evolution won't be technological. It will be telepathic. Because when we learn to listen beyond words, we'll realize we were never disconnected in the first place. We've just been speaking too loudly to hear the silence between us. If this episode resonated with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it. It really helps me reach more souls who might need this message. Until then, remember, you are connected, you are consciousness, and the universe is always speaking, if only we choose to listen.